Montana Territory, June 1878. The wind scraped the prairie dry and mean, and Francesca Fairchild buried her husband beneath it. The sun had not yet risen when she stood barefoot at the edge of the fresh grave, her dress soaked at the hem with dew and grief. The boys Milo, age 7, and Mason, 5, clung to each other behind her, their small hands stained with soil from trying to help. She had not cried yet. Not when the fever took John in 3 days flat. Not when she stitched him into the bedsheet. Not when she dug with her own hands until the shovel blistered her palms. She just stood there, staring at the mound as if daring it to give him back. A horse approached slow behind them, hooves muffled by the grass. Francesca did not turn. She knew who it was. He had been around since the fever came, quiet, capable, never asking anything of her. Just showing up when the roof needed a patch or when the cow wandered too far. Rhett Callahan dismounted and tied his gelding to the fence post without a word. He wore his hat low, the brim shadowing his face, but she could feel his eyes on her. Not pitying, not soft, just solid. The boys turned to him. Milo stepped forward, voice tight. "We buried him." Rhett nodded. "I see that." His voice was low and calm, like a river at dusk. "You two help your mama?" Mason sniffled and nodded. "You did good," Rhett said simply, then looked to Francesca. "I brought oats and salt. Stores near out again." She nodded once, lips pressed into a line. "Thank you." He did not leave. He did not speak again. He just stood there, hat in hand now, as if giving her space meant standing in it with her. The sun rose slow behind them, spilling light across the prairie, and the three of them standing in front of the grave. Francesca's knees gave a little, just a slight buckle, and Rhett caught her elbow gently, steadying her without a word. She pulled away a second later, jaw tight. "I am fine." "All right," he said, respectfully quiet. She turned back to the cabin, the boys trailing her like shadows. Rhett followed behind, leading his horse, and set the supplies by the porch without asking if he could. Then he checked the fence line, fixed the loose board near the chicken coop, and said nothing of it. That night, after the boys had gone to sleep curled together on one cot, Francesca sat on the porch, hands folded in her lap. Her dress was wrinkled, her hair a mess of loose strands. Rhett was on the bottom step, whittling a piece of pine slowly. The silence stretched long between them, but it did not feel empty. She finally spoke, voice hoarse. "He was not supposed to die." "No one is," Rhett said, not looking up. "He was strong, worked hard, never got sick." "I know. I do not know what to do now." He stopped whittling, set the knife in his boot. "You do what you already are. You keep breathing. You feed your boys. You wake up each morning and put one foot in front of the other." She turned to look at him, her eyes sharp. "That is not living. That is surviving." Rhett met her gaze, steady. "Sometimes surviving is the first kind of living." She looked away, jaw clenched. "You always this quiet?" "No," he said. "Just with people who need quiet more than they need words." She breathed in deep, then looked back at him, not to argue, but because something in her chest ached in a different way now. Not grief, just the space after. Rhett came back the next day, and the next. He never intruded, just brought what they needed, fixed what was broken, and sat with her when she let him. The boys took to him fast. Milo watched how Rhett tied knots and asked questions about horses. Mason liked to sit beside him and hand him nails when he worked on the barn. Francesca watched from the doorway sometimes, arms folded, trying to understand why this man, a man who owed her nothing, kept showing up. 2 weeks passed. She started eating again. Even laughed once when Mason tried to feed a chicken a button and it pecked his boot. One night, after the boys were asleep, she sat beside Rhett on the porch, this time closer. "I do not know why you are here," she said quietly. He shifted, looking out at the moonlit prairie. "You needed someone. You do not even know me." "I know enough." Silence again, but she did not move away. "I feel like I am failing them," she whispered. "I do not know how to be both mother and father." "You do not have to be both," he said. "You just have to be their mother. That is more than enough." Her throat tightened. "You say things like that and make it sound so simple." He turned to her, eyes steady. "It is not simple, but it is true." She looked at him, really looked. He had lines on his face from the sun, hands rough from work. He was not a man who talked much, but when he did, it mattered. And he never once tried to fix her grief. Just let her carry it, beside him. Something bloomed in her chest then. Not sudden, just steady, like warmth after cold. "Rhett," she said softly. He looked over, eyes meeting hers. "I do not know what this is, what we are doing." "Neither do I," he said. "But I am not going anywhere." She searched his face, found no lies there. Just a quiet kind of promise. "I think I want you to stay," she said, voice barely above a breath. "I will," he said, "as long as you want me to." She nodded, tears gathering at the corners of her eyes, but this time they were not from sorrow. They sat in silence then, shoulder to shoulder, and she leaned into him just a little. He let her, and for the first time since the world shattered, Francesca felt something like peace settle in her bones. Not because the grief was gone, but because she was not alone in it anymore. Summer deepened. The grass turned brittle at the edges, and the wind carried the scent of sage and dust. Evenings stretched longer now, the sky brushing pale lavender before settling into a soft indigo hush. Francesca stood in the garden behind the cabin, tugging at a stubborn weed near the beans. Her hair had come loose in the heat, damp strands clinging to her neck. Behind her, Mason was chasing a yellow butterfly with a tin pail, while Milo crouched under the clothesline, inspecting a beetle with the intensity of a scholar. She straightened slowly, pressing a hand into her lower back. "Milo," she called, not sharply, just enough to bring his attention around. "That beetle doesn't belong in your pocket." His reply was a groan, followed by a sheepish toss of the insect into the grass. Rhett's voice came from the side gate. "That beetle might have had plans." Francesca turned to find him leaning a shoulder against the post, leading his horse behind him. He had a tan canvas sack slung over one arm and a pair of gloves tucked into his belt. "Brought some fence wire from town," he said. "Traded for it with a fellow who owed me." She brushed her palms on her skirt. "You never stop working, do you?" His jaw ticked, but his mouth softened. "Idle hands don't suit me." She watched him for a moment, then nodded toward the half-finished fence down the hill. "You'll need the post-hole digger. It's in the barn." "I'll find it." As he moved past her, she caught the faint scent of leather and sun-warmed cotton. Something settled low in her chest, unfamiliar but not unwelcome. She turned back to the garden before it could pull too sharp. Later, after the boys were asleep and the moon hung like a tarnished coin above the ridge, she found Rhett sitting on a short stool in the barn, sharpening a drawknife. The lantern beside him flickered low, casting more shadow than light. She leaned against the doorway. "Do you ever rest?" He didn't look up. "I rest when the work's done." "And when is that?" His hands stilled. "Truth is, I find work when I don't know what else to do." She stepped into the barn, folding her arms. "You always this honest? Seems fair to be." She let the quiet stretch between them. The horses shifted in their stalls, the night breathing around them. "I used to do the same," she said, "after we lost the baby." Rhett lifted his eyes. "It was before Mason. Between the two boys," she said, voice steady. though her fingers curled tighter around her arms. I cleaned walls that didn't need cleaning. Cooked meals no one ate. John said I was chasing ghosts. You weren't, Rhett said. You were trying to keep from falling apart. She met his gaze. How do you know? He set the draw knife aside. Because I've done it too. She didn't ask for details. He didn't offer them. But something shifted between them in that moment, something neither of them named, but both understood. She sat on the edge of a hay bale. Were you married? No, ever close. He looked down at his hands. Once. She was the blacksmith's daughter in Helena. Thought I'd marry her. Then her father took a job in Spokane and she went with him. Didn't ask me to come. Francesca's throat tightened. Did you want her to? I wasn't ready to say yes. And she wasn't the waiting kind. They were quiet again. The lantern cracked softly as the flame dipped. I sometimes wonder, she said, if love runs out, if you spend it all on one person, and when they're gone, that's it. Rhett leaned back against the stall, arms resting on his knees. I think love changes shape, doesn't leave, just waits for you to see it different. She looked at him then, really looked. The slope of his shoulders, the calm in his face. Not handsome in any polished way, but rough-hewn and honest. He wasn't trying to charm her. He was just there. And she was beginning to understand the weight of that. She stood, brushing hay from her skirt. Come inside. There's coffee on the stove. He rose, slow and steady. You sure? She met his eyes. Yes. They walked back to the cabin in silence, but it no longer felt like an absence. Felt like a kind of language, one that didn't require explanation. Inside, the fire had burned low. She poured the coffee while he sat at the table, his hands wrapped around the chipped mug she offered. Neither of them spoke as they drank, the quiet stretching long and easy. When he stood to leave, she followed him to the door. He stepped out onto the porch, then turned to her. Francesca, he said, voice low. She waited. You don't have to carry all of it alone. She nodded once, not in agreement but in understanding. Then she reached out, fingers brushing his forearm. I know. He touched the brim of his hat, then walked into the darkness, boots soft against the dry earth. She stood there long after he was gone, the night wrapped close around her, and for the first time it didn't feel like a weight. Felt like something waiting to be filled. By late July, the creek near the cottonwoods ran slower, shallower. Francesca stood knee-deep in it, her skirt hitched and tied at her hips, a washtub balanced on a flat rock beside her. The boys were upriver with a neighbor's daughter, chasing minnows with branches and laughing like grief had never touched them. It made her heart ache, but not in the way it had before. It was the ache of something healing. She scrubbed one of Mason's shirts against the washboard, eyes narrowed against the sunlight glinting off the water. A swallow dipped low overhead. When a footstep crunched behind her, she already knew the rhythm of it. You're early, she said without turning. Rhett stepped down the bank, carrying a small burlap sack and a folded oilskin parcel. Traded a bit of firewood for some dried cherries. Thought the boys might like them. Francesca wrung the shirt out and laid it flat on a bush branch to dry. They will. He squatted near the edge of the stream, setting the parcels down. You always wash clothes out here? Only when the cabin feels too tight, she said. Water's cooler, and I like the quiet. Rhett watched the current for a stretch. You used to live in town? She nodded, reaching for another garment. Back when John was working freight routes out of Helena, we had a place near the livery. Small, but clean. What brought you out here? John wanted land. Said he was tired of loading other men's goods. Thought we could build something of our own. Rhett leaned back on his heels. Did you want to leave town? She dipped the shirt in the water, her voice low. I wanted what he wanted. It felt easier then to follow than to question. He didn't respond right away. The water gurgled soft between them. Seems like you're doing more than following now, he said. She looked over at him, one eyebrow raised. You think so? You're holding this place together, Francesca. Not just surviving it, making it work. She blinked at that, not because it surprised her, but because it came without expectation or flattery. Just fact. I don't feel strong, she admitted. You don't have to feel it for it to be true. She turned back to her washing, hands moving slower now. You always make sense like that? Most of the time I just say what's around me. You do the rest. That pulled a quiet breath from her, not quite a laugh. She shook out the last shirt, spread it beside the others, and stepped out of the stream, pressing her wet feet into the grass. You ever been married, Rhett? He glanced up at her. You asked once already. This time I'm not asking about women. He tilted his head. I'm asking if you ever tied yourself to something. Land. Family. A place. He rubbed his jaw, considering. No. Drifted most of my 20s. Cattle drives, supply runs. Slept under more stars than roofs. And now. He met her eyes, his voice quiet but firm. Now I'm tired of drifting. She nodded slowly. I used to think stillness was something you earned after a good life. Now I think it's something you carve out when you're too worn to keep moving. I think you're right. They stood there for a long time, the sun sliding down in the west, the creek whispering past them. When the children came running down the path, red-faced and wet-heeled, Mason tugged at Rhett's sleeve, holding up 2 rocks. Which one's prettier? He asked. Rhett crouched down, studied them like they were gemstones. This one's smoother, he said, tapping the darker rock. But this one's got color. Depends what you like. I like the blue, Mason decided, gripping it tight. Rhett ruffled his hair, and the boy scampered off. Milo lingered, glancing between them. Mama, can Rhett eat supper with us? Francesca looked at Rhett. He waited, respectful. If he wants to, she said. I do, he answered softly. That night they ate under the awning. The table was old pine, scarred in the center, but she'd laid a clean cloth over it. Mason leaned against Rhett's arm as he ate, not speaking much, just present. Milo talked about the creek, about the fish he almost caught, about the way Rhett had showed him how to cut kindling without splintering the wood. Francesca listened, spooning stew into bowls, her eyes drawn again and again to the man across from her. He didn't fill the room with noise. He didn't act like he belonged. He just helped wash the dishes when they were done and held the lantern steady while she checked the latch on the coop. When the boys were tucked in and this time Milo asked Rhett to look at his drawing of a wagon before he slept, Francesca stepped outside and found him sitting on the porch rail, hat off, the night air thick and still. She walked over, handed him a tin cup with black tea and a hint of honey. He took it without a word. She stood beside him, quiet. I never imagined it like this, she said after a while. What's that? Life after John. I thought it would always feel like a wound. He didn't answer immediately. It still might. Some days. She nodded. But not all of them. He looked at her then, not searching, just seeing. No, not all. She turned to face him fully. You never asked me for anything. Wouldn't take what wasn't freely given. I know, she said. That's why I wanted to say. He waited. I want you here. Not just for the boys. For me. His breath caught just once. Then he stood, slow and sure, stepping closer. You sure? I'm tired of being uncertain, she said. I've had enough of that to last me. He reached out then, not to take but to offer. His hand met hers, rough against her palm, and she didn't let go. They stood like that beneath the stars. 2 people who had learned to live with silence, now letting it carry something new. Not grief this time, but something quieter, steadier. Love, blooming not from words, but from all the days he'd shown up without asking for anything. From the way he'd waited beside her sorrow until she was ready to feel something else. She leaned into him, and he wrapped his arm around her shoulders. And for the first time, she didn't feel like she was leaving something behind. She felt like she was beginning again. August brought wind. Dry, fretful gusts that tugged at shutters and carried the sharp scent of burnt grass from somewhere east. Francesca stood near the barn with a damp cloth across her brow, watching the horizon for signs of storm, though the sky stayed clear. The boys were in the loft with a neighbor's boy, sorting through a stack of old seed sacks for a game they'd invented involving marbles and guessing. Rhett was mending the roof of the lean to beside the corral, sleeves rolled, shirt clinging across his back from the heat. She brought him water in a tin cup, the handle bent from long use. "You've been up there since sunup," she said, shielding her eyes. He took the cup, drank deep, then tipped it back to her. "If I stop, the wood splits worse. Found rot along the beam. I always meant to fix it. Never did. Now it's fixed." She shaded her face with her hand, studying the way he'd braced the new plank. "You ever think of building your own place? I've built plenty. Just never stayed in one. You think you might?" His eyes met hers, steady as ever. "I've thought about it more lately." She felt the words settle between them, not rushed, not uncertain, just real. She nodded once, then turned toward the cabin. "Francesca," she paused, "you ever think about what you'd want if you weren't trying to make everything hold together?" She didn't answer right away. Then softly, "I don't know. I've never let myself think like that." "Well," he said, "maybe you ought to." That night, after the boys were bathed and asleep, she stepped outside with her mending basket, took up her spot on the porch. Rhett was already there, boots off, back to the railing, hands resting on his knees. "I've been thinking," she said, pulling a sock onto her darning egg. "About what I asked?" She nodded. "I think I'd like to teach again." He turned his head toward her. "Before I had Milo, I taught letters and numbers in Helena. Just a few children, mostly in the back of the chapel. I liked the quiet of it, the way their faces lit up when a word finally made sense. You think the schoolhouse in town would take you on? Maybe, but it's a long ride each day, and I can't leave the boys that far." Rhett picked at a splinter on the porch rail. "What if we built something closer?" She looked up, needle paused in the wool. "A schoolhouse? Out here. There's families within riding distance. Marsh's, Tanner's, that widow near the butte with her 2 girls. They'd come." She blinked, then lowered her sewing. "You'd help build it?" "Course I would." "You think I'd let you hammer shingles alone?" That made her laugh, soft and genuine. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You should have something that's yours, not just what's left to you." She set the sock aside. "And what about you? What's yours?" He looked down at his hands. "Maybe I ain't figured that part yet." She reached for one of his calloused palms, turned it over in hers. "You've given us so much already. You fixed what I couldn't. Sat with me when I didn't know how to speak. That counts." His voice was low. "You ever think about us? What this could be?" She rubbed her thumb across the rough line of his palm. "I do." He looked up, and she met his gaze without flinching. "I don't want to push," he said, "but I won't pretend I don't feel what's growing here." "I know," she said. "Me too." The wind picked up, dry leaves crackling along the path. She didn't pull her hand away. "Then let's not wait," she said. "Not for perfect days or finished fences. Let's build it now, whatever it is." He nodded once. "All right." She leaned in, rested her forehead against his. "I want you here, Rhett, for mornings and nights, for hard seasons and quiet ones. I'm yours, he whispered. If you'll have me. She kissed him then, slow, like a promise. And when she pulled back, her eyes were clear, her voice steady. I will. The porch creaked beneath them as they stood together. Tomorrow would bring work and the next day more. But tonight there was this, the steady beat of hope, the quiet certainty of two hearts choosing each other without rush, without fear. The wind moved through the grass behind them, but the house stood firm, and so did they. September came gentle. The air softened, the heat easing its grip on the land. Grass browned at the tips, but the trees near the ridge held green still, reluctant to let the season slip. Francesca stood at the far edge of the field with a measuring rope in hand, dust rising around her boots as she marked the outline for the new schoolhouse. Rhett hammered a stake into the ground beside her. That's 12 paces long. You sure that's enough? It's what I have desks for, she said, adjusting the rope. 6 benches, 3 to a side. I can stretch lessons more than I can stretch lumber. He wiped his brow with the back of his hand. I'll cut boards tomorrow. We can start the floor frame before next week. She looked at him, the corner of her mouth lifting. You talk like you're already part of it. I am, he said, eyes steady on hers. Aren't I? Her voice was quiet. Yes, you are. The boys were down by the creek with the Tanner girl, a basket of apples between them. Francesca had made sure to send them with a blanket and a warning about snakes. She didn't worry much anymore. They were growing into themselves, still boys, but steadier on their feet, quicker to laugh than cry. Rhett straightened, brushing his palms clean. I meant to ask, he said. That ledger book you had out last night. What was it for? She held the rope loose. I'm putting together a plan. Reading levels, letters, arithmetic. I want to have something finished before the first frost. You want help writing it down? She glanced sideways. You write much. Enough to spell names and count pay. But I listen better. She stepped closer, squinting up at the sun. Then I'll read it to you tonight. You can tell me if it makes sense. I'll sit quiet and hear every word. They walked back to the cabin together, the wind behind them. The porch baked warm under the afternoon light. Francesca stepped inside to fetch water, and when she returned, Rhett was standing by the doorframe, holding something small in his hands. She tilted her head. What's that? He turned it to show her. A wooden carving plane, palm-sized, the shape of a fox curled in sleep. Its ears were etched fine, tail wrapped around its body. For Mason, he said. He's been asking about animals that stay through winter. She reached out, fingertips brushing the smooth grain. He'll keep it close. He holds onto what's given. I know, Rhett said. So do you. She looked up, and the weight of his words settled deep. She didn't speak, but she didn't have to. That evening, as the sky turned the shade of worn denim, they sat beneath the awning. Francesca had set the ledger aside after reading aloud, and Rhett listened without interrupting, nodding when something made sense, asking a question when it didn't. When she finished, she closed the book and leaned back. You think it'll work? She asked. I think you'll make it work, he said. She reached for his hand. I used to be afraid of starting anything new. John handled beginnings. I just kept things steady. You're more than steady, Rhett said. You build. She looked down at their linked fingers. I'm not afraid now. He touched her cheek, rough thumb trailing the curve of her jaw. Neither am I. That night, she didn't let him walk back to the bunkhouse. She opened the cabin door wider, and he stepped inside without hesitation. The boys were asleep, curled feet to feet on the cot. Francesca lit the lamp low and set it on the table. Rhett stood in the middle of the room, eyes on her. You sure? She nodded, voice steady. I want you here. Not just tonight. Always. He crossed to her, and she wrapped her arms around his waist, feeling the strength beneath his shirt, the quiet steadiness that had held her up all these months. He bent his head, and their foreheads touched. "I'll never leave you," he whispered. "I know." They lay side by side in her bed, the window cracked to let in the wind. He held her with both arms, and she rested her head against his chest, listening to the beat of his heart until sleep took her. When the sun rose, they woke together. No rush, no need for words. Francesca poured coffee while Rhett stoked the stove. Mason padded in on bare feet, clutching the fox carving to his chest. Milo followed, hair tousled, and climbed into Rhett's lap without asking. Francesca stood at the counter, watching them, a hand on her belly without thinking. She'd felt it, faint but certain, just before dawn, the smallest flutter, like a leaf in wind. She turned, and Rhett caught the look in her eyes. "Is something wrong?" he asked. She stepped toward him, voice soft but clear. "I think we're going to have another." His eyes widened, and then he stood, slow as reverence. "You sure?" She nodded. He reached for her, both hands on her waist. "You're all right." "I am," she said, smiling. "I truly am." He kissed her forehead, then her lips, then knelt in front of her, resting his cheek against the curve of her stomach. The boys watched, puzzled but quiet. Francesca reached for their hands. "We're going to be a bigger family," she said. Milo's eyes lit up. Mason looked down at the fox in his hands, then up at Rhett. "Can we build a cradle?" Rhett grinned, eyes warm. "We'll start tomorrow." And they did. Together they built the schoolhouse beam by beam. Francesca taught lessons under its roof come October. Students gathered on benches Rhett had carved himself. The boys walked there with her each morning, their boots kicking up leaves. By winter, the cradle stood in the corner of the cabin, lined with wool. Francesca's belly grew round, and Rhett never left her side. He planted winter cabbage, hauled wood, held her every night like the world was finally right. They married in early spring, beneath the cottonwoods by the creek. Francesca wore a dress she'd sewn herself, pale blue with sleeves she could roll up. Rhett wore his only good shirt, brushed clean and buttoned neat. The boys stood beside them, bare-toothed grins wide. They spoke no vows beyond what they already knew. "I'll hold you. I'll stay. We are home." And that was enough. They lived like that, honest, rooted, and whole. Through seasons and storms, through quiet mornings and busy days. Francesca taught, Rhett built, the children grew. And in the cradle by the fire, their daughter slept, thumb tucked beneath her chin, the shape of both their hearts in her face. It wasn't the life she dreamed of when she first came west. It was better, hard-won, true, and theirs forever.